Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, or Japan's in there, so it might actually even. Yep, you're right. No, I'm muted. Is everybody else? Okay, thanks, Mohammed. Japan, you are truly dedicated. I don't know, it's probably like midnight or something for you right now, so I should say late night for you. Um, Welcome to PostGIS Day 2020, Crunchy's data versions of it. We have an exciting schedule. We're going to start off with Jessica Kane, who's going to start. Oh, some background stuff. There's 15 minutes between each session, and we did that so that if you need to get up, leave, go get some food, go relieve yourself or something like that, you're all set. Let's see what else. The sessions can be kind of interactive. Oh, Malaysia too. Welcome, Malaysia. So we ask that if you have a question, you put it in the Q&A, and that way we can answer it while the talk's going on. If you want to speak, please raise your hand. You should see at the bottom of your bar like a raise your hand button. Go ahead and do that. And I think that's enough intro. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in. We are going to get started now. So our first talk is by Jessica Kane. It's using QGIS with PostGIS, a dynamic duo, and it's going to be a video to start with. So we're going to actually start up the video, and then Jessica's actually here though. She's actually in the Q&A. So if you want to ask questions, you can ask questions, and we'll put her back on after the video is done. So let's go ahead and get started. Where is it? No. It doesn't show it. Okay, well, I'll just have to share my desktop. And, oh wait, hold on, folks, sorry. I don't think I shared my desktop with sound. Yeah. No, that's not it. Oh, that's right, share computer sound. There we go. Now we're ready. Sorry, we're working out the kinks in the first session of the day. Please let me know if you can't hear it as we get started.
Hello, my name is Jessica Kane, and I'm a project manager and developer at Lime 45, and this is an introduction to using PostGIS with QGIS. I think a lot of you know QGIS is a well-known open source desktop GIS application, and today I'm going to go over the basics of using PostGIS with QGIS. So if you are new to PostGIS, this is a great place for you to start. And if you're more experienced, I'm hoping this is a good refresher for you. And you might even learn some new little thing that QGIS leverages in PostGIS that you didn't know about before. So I do have a few slides at the beginning, but mostly this is going to be a demonstration of different features to show you how this dynamic duo really does work together seamlessly. PostGIS plus QGIS really is a flexible solution. Together, they can be the backbone of a really powerful enterprise GIS system with a lot of users, but they're also really great for working on solo projects. So this is what I'm going to go over today. I'm going to start with a brief overview, then we'll talk about connecting QGIS to PostGIS. I'll go over working with PostGIS data in QGIS, talk about the QGIS database manager and how you can interact with PostGIS through that, saving QGIS projects and styles in PostGIS, which is really helpful when you have multiple people working on the same projects. And then at the end, I'll talk about some additional features and resources since there is too much really for me to go over in this one presentation. So just to start out, QGIS, like I mentioned, is an open source desktop GIS. You can use it to view and edit vector and raster data in a variety of file formats and databases. And it has a lot of different tools, including geoprocessing functions, spatial analyses, styling, and cartography, as well as a Python implementation, PyQGIS, that allows for scripting of different geospatial processes. And there's a lot of contributors in the QGIS community, and they're always adding plugins and additional functionality. PostGIS is a spatial extension for Postgres, which is an open source relational database system. It supports location queries in SQL, so buffer and intersects, supports vector and raster data, and really the amount of functionality that PostGIS adds to Postgres really makes Postgres the most fully featured spatial database out there. And I might be using the term PostGIS throughout this presentation, but just remember that I'm referring to a Postgres database that has the PostGIS extension added to it. So there's a lot of obvious benefits for using Postgres in an enterprise environment where you have multiple users who need access to the same data and they all have varying permissions. Cliff is going to cover that more in a different presentation. So I'm going to focus more on QGIS and PostGIS and kind of the specific features that really bring the two together. And they're also great for working on smaller projects. Instead of working with a bunch of shape files, you can work with PostGIS to easily organize and maintain your data. And really, you'll see throughout this presentation that you can leverage a lot of great PostGIS functionality without ever having to leave QGIS. So a really quick overview for folks who are just getting into databases. Schemas are a way to organize your data. So they're kind of logical buckets that you can put your data into. When I'm working on smaller projects, I like to put a lot of the publicly available data out there, data that I might use across multiple projects, such as county boundaries, in the public schema, and then I might have a separate schema for each project. So in this example, I'm going to be using data for a ghost town map in a county in northern Michigan. The lumber industry was really big in the 1800s, but then as that industry fell away, the towns ended up disappearing. And so there's a number of locations in Otsego County, Michigan, where there are ghost towns, and the Historical Society wanted to have a map of those. So as you can see, I have a ghost town map schema, and then within that schema, I have 5 tables. And in that bottom screenshot, I wanted to show you what a geometry column looks like. So a geometry or a geography column essentially stores the spatial information for each record. And in this instance, we're talking about vector data, so points or lines or polygons or multi-lines, etc. So there on the right, you can see that non-spatial attributes like settlement will be stored in a column, and then the geometry column is what's storing all of the spatial information for that record. Real quick, these are screenshots from PGAdmin, which is a database management tool that a lot of people use to access Postgres, but we will not be using PGAdmin in here. I just wanted to use those screenshots for demonstration purposes. So a couple tips for using PostGIS tables in QGIS. Postgres stores table and column names in lowercase. And so try to remember when you're naming your tables and your columns, use lowercase, and then you can use underscores to separate words. And then this is just good practice in general, but QGIS will sometimes have issues if you don't have a primary key on each table. So you want to make sure that you do have a primary key on each of your PostGIS tables. So I'm just going to jump right into the demonstration. We're going to start off with how to connect QGIS to PostGIS, and I'm going to be going over the QGIS authentication system, some tips and tricks there, as well as using a master password. All right, so I'm going to start with how do you connect QGIS to PostGIS? If you're looking for information on how to download QGIS, download Postgres, download PostGIS, and create your first spatial database, I'll be including a link at the end of this presentation to an article that'll kind of walk you through that. But in order to save time, I already have a spatial database. I just want to connect to it in QGIS to show you all of the cool things that QGIS can do with PostGIS. So there's a couple different places that you can go to connect to PostGIS. One is to the Data Source Manager, which you can get to from the toolbar. And when you come in here, you'd of course select Postgres, you'd select New, and that'll pop up the Create a New PostGIS Connection window. Another place you can get to, which I find more convenient, is in the browser. In this pane, you can dock that in anywhere you want in QGIS, but you can just right-click on PostGIS and select New Connection. So when we're filling out this information, the name is just the name of the connection, so you can reference it and find it in the future when you're trying to connect again. The host, since this is just on my local machine, is localhost. The default port for Postgres is 5432. So if you've changed that default, obviously you'd want to put something different in here. And I'm going to be connecting to a database called demo. So there's two different types of authentication in QGIS. One is called basic, where you would just put in your username and password for Postgres right in here. But you can see there's a warning that says, hey, if you do this, your credentials are going to be stored as plain text in a project file. And that's not very secure because somebody could just come in, right click on the QGIS project file and open it up in a text editor, and they'd be able to see your password right there in plain text, your password for Postgres. So instead, it's usually recommended to create an authentication configuration. And to do that, I would click on the green button. And since this is the first time I'm doing this, it's asking me to set a master authentication password. Essentially, kind of a password for your passwords. Essentially, QGIS is going to store my Postgres credentials in an encrypted database. And so anytime I want to access that, if it hasn't been cached in the session I'm currently in QGIS, it's going to ask me for my master password. So I'm going to put this in here, and it's just showing red because they need to match. Now this is something you want to write down and remember, because once you set it, there's really no way to retrieve that master password. I will show you a trick in case you were to forget it, but just try not to forget it. So now that I've created a master password, it's asking for my information to create the authentication configuration for PostGIS. So here again, I can name this whatever I like, so I can reference it in the future. I'm going to call this PostGIS. And I'm just going to be putting in my Postgres username and my password. I'll save that, and I'm going to test that connection, and I was able to connect to the database. One thing I'll point out here is that now QGIS has auto-generated this ID for my configuration, and that's something I'm just going to leave as is. If you're working with QGIS and PostGIS in an enterprise environment, this ID would need to be the same across everybody in the organization, all the Postgres users, and so you just come in, unlock it, and edit it. But for now, I'm going to leave it as it is. A couple other options I'm going to check down here is to list tables with no geometry. I want to see all of my Postgres tables, not just the ones that have spatial data in them. And then I also want to be able to save QGIS projects in PostGIS. I'll be going over that later. So now that we've connected over here, you can see my database demo and two schemas, including a number of tables. And so now I'm connected to PostGIS, and I can drag tables into the canvas, view them, and I'll be set to go. Before I move on, I did want to show you how to manage your master password. So you can go into settings and options and make sure you are on the authentication pane. And then you'll be able to see a number of configurations here if you've created more than one. Right now I just have one. You can edit, delete, or add configurations in this pane. But if you want to complete different actions related to your master password, you can click on Utilities. And then here you can see that you can reset it. But that's, of course, if you still remember what your old one was. You can clear the cache. So it's going to, QGIS will essentially say, hey, give me your master password again if you try to access that encrypted database. And the other part I wanted to show is that if you do forget your master password, you can erase the authentication database. This is the QGIS authentication database. That's essentially going to delete all of your configurations and your master password. And then you can go back in, recreate all your configurations. It will prompt you again to create a new master password. So now that we've connected to PostGIS, obviously we want to work with some data. So I'm going to go over how to bring layers into QGIS from PostGIS and also how to work with some non-spatial tables in QGIS. So back in QGIS, I want to see my ghost towns on the map. So I'm going to go ahead and just grab it from my browser pane and drag it onto the canvas. And there are my ghost towns. Now, if I want a base map for reference, OpenStreetMap comes by default with QGIS, so I can pull that in. And if I zoom out, I can see that we are indeed in Michigan and not the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, so that's good. Now, any changes that I make to features here, if I delete them, edit their attributes, add a feature, as long as I save the QGIS layer, it will save back into the PostGIS database. So if we want to take a look at what our data looks like, I can use the Identify tool. It'll show me the features attributes here. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this layer. I want to add a new ghost town that they just discovered. We'll just call it new ghost town. I'm going to leave the other attributes blank. This is my primary key for the table, and I've set it to auto increment, so I will just leave that as is. And there we can see it was added right here, I believe. Their new ghost town. Now, as long as I just click save, now that's been saved back to the PostGIS database. Anytime I'm not working with a layer, I like to unclick the edit button just to make sure that I don't accidentally do something that I didn't mean to. So now you can see how we can pull in all kinds of different spatial layers, view them in QGIS, edit them. But we can also work with non-spatial tables in QGIS. And you might ask, well, why would you want to do that? Well, if you think about, if you have a county boundary and you have a bunch of different demographics data, and the demographics data is not, it's in its own table, it's not in a spatial table, but you do want to connect the demographics data to the county or the different counties and show different statistics on a map. In a more enterprise situation, if an organization has a number of facilities, they have their facilities in a spatial table, but they might have inspections of the facilities in a non-spatial table. And if they want to visualize some type of statistics or data about inspections on a map based off of the facility's locations, they might want to pull in a non-spatial table, join it up to their spatial table in QGIS, and map it that way. So in our example data set, I do have a non-spatial data table here called post office. So essentially each of these ghost towns has a had a post office. And in our post office table, if I open the attribute table, you can see that there's some information, the settlement name, and then when the post office started and when it ended. So if I want to be able to see all of this information, when I click on a ghost town, I can join the non-spatial table to the spatial table. And I can do that by double clicking on ghost town, which will bring up the properties. And I can click on joins and the green button. And so here I'm in the layer properties for ghost towns. I'm joining to post office, and both tables have a settlement field, which should match up, and that's how we're going to join them. There's a couple other options over here you might want to include. If you include the editable join layer, that means that you will be able to edit attributes from both of these tables in the one pop-up for the ghost town. And I'll show you that in a second. So there are some things when working with join tables, you want to make sure that if I delete a ghost town and it was joined to a post office record, do I also want the database to delete the post office record, which would be delete cascade? Or if I add a ghost town to the map, do I want the database to automatically add a record to the post office table that would then correlate with that ghost town? So those are some options you might want to consider when you're figuring out how you want your join tables to work in QGIS. So I'm just going to click upsert on edit. and click OK. And now when I click on a ghost town, I'm going to see over here that I can now also see my post office start and end date. And if I want to edit, I can click the form here. And right now you can see everything's here, but none of it is editable. In order to be able to edit, I have to toggle on editing for both layers. And then if I click to open the form, I could edit the name of the settlement, the township, that's all in the ghost town table, but I can also put in some post office dates. So here's 1880. What if I said, actually that should be 1881 to 82. And so that's a cool little trick that you can do by joining up non-spatial tables with spatial tables. All right, moving right along here. Next, we're going to talk about the QGIS Database Manager. And you can do all kinds of cool things with PostGIS through this manager, including importing shapefiles and other file formats into PostGIS through QGIS. You can edit your database schemas, tables, and columns through QGIS. And you can also write SQL queries in the Database Manager, execute them, and get results from PostGIS right there in QGIS. And then the results of the query you can add to your map canvas. So before we get to the Database Manager, I wanted to show you a few things that you can do directly in the browser pane. So you can create a schema in your PostGIS database from here. You can also rename and delete a schema. And then you can do similar things for tables. You can rename a table. You can delete a table. And when you delete it here, you delete it in your PostGIS database. You can truncate a table, which is delete all the records from your table. You can export your table to a file, and there's a lot of different file formats you can export your data to: GeoPackage, Shapefile, GeoJSON, etc. And you can also look at layer properties. So you can see metadata. You can actually preview your layer, and you can look at the attributes for that table. So those are some of the things that you can do in the browser, but you can actually do quite a bit more in the Database Manager. So when you open up the Database Manager, you want to make sure that you can see the connection details here for your database, and that will tell the manager which database you're working with right now. So one of the great things about this tool is that you can import data into your PostGIS database directly from a shapefile or a geopackage or a file geodatabase, pretty much any file format that QGIS works with. So if you click on import layer / file, you'll see that if you've already loaded your shapefile, for example, into QGIS, it will show up in this drop-down, and you could select it here and load it into PostGIS. Or you can navigate directly to the file, and you can either select the SHP file or the zipped file, which is what I'm going to do, and that will bring it in. You're going to select the schema that you want, name your table, and remember, oops, always do lowercase. You can change the name of your primary key or your geometry column or leave them as is. It's going to auto detect the coordinate reference system that the data is already in, and you can change that if it was incorrect or leave it if it was correct. The target SRID, the target coordinate reference system, you can change that here. So if your data is coming in all different kinds of reference systems and you want all of your data to be in one system in your PostGIS database, you would select the SRID that you want here, the spatial reference ID, and then that would essentially do that transformation as it's importing into PostGIS. There's a couple other options here. I always select convert fields names to lowercase, and then we will import that here. It might take a while depending on the size of your data set. This should just take a couple seconds. And there we go. So that is the town range layer for all of Michigan. And we should see it. There it is. We can bring it in and look at it right there. So that's a pretty cool tool that you can use to import data into PostGIS using the database manager in QGIS. So a few other things that you can do in the database manager. You can create and delete schemas here, just like you can in the browser pane. You can create and delete tables. You can also edit tables. So if I select the table that we just imported and we come into edit, you can see that you can do a lot of different things to your PostGIS database right here. You can add or delete columns, you can edit column names, change column types, add a geometry column to a non-spatial table. You can also add a primary key constraint, so your unique ID in case you have a table which for some reason doesn't have one. You can also add an index, including a spatial index. So I'm going to go ahead, and there I've created a spatial index for my town range layer. So that means that if I run a spatial query using that table, it should run faster. So those are some of the things that you can do in the database manager with your PostGIS database. You can also run queries directly on your PostGIS database, SQL queries. So here we can select from our counties layer, and we just want the one county where our ghost towns are. So we're looking for Otsego County. Here it's giving us back the one county. There's a couple different things that you can do here. You can load this in as a new layer into the map. You just want to make sure that you select your unique value and your geometry column, and you can click load. And that is going to load directly into our map, the results of that query, which is pretty cool. You can also run spatial queries. So that's one of the real strengths of PostGIS, right? You can run spatial queries on your data, and you can do that directly here from QGIS. So I have a hydrography lines layer. That's the entire state of Michigan. So I'll show you what that looks like. And it might take a little bit of time to load, but you can see it's the whole state of Michigan. Now I might want some streams and rivers on my ghost town map, but I don't want to have to be working with this large data set every time. So what I can do is I can come in here and I can say, hey, just give me the lines that intersect or overlap Otsego County. And I can go ahead, execute that. Keyboard shortcut Control R. That's going to give me back 164 lines. And I could load it as a new layer, or I could create a view in PostGIS. So a view is essentially a virtual table. It is not stored on disk. It's essentially the results of the query. So it looks like this, right? It looks like a table, but it is essentially the results of that query. And I can create that view. And it's going to add that to my PostGIS database. So I'm going to remove the statewide layer here and then pull in the view I just created. And there you can see now I'm working with a much smaller data set. So those are some of the things that you can do with the QGIS Database Manager. Obviously a really powerful tool. You can do a lot of things in PostGIS and you don't even have to leave QGIS. The next thing I wanted to talk about is saving styles and default styles to PostGIS. So this is essentially when you've taken all the time to style all of the symbology on your layers, the labels, even the forms. You have it looking really nice. And you might want to reuse those layers in a different project. Well, you don't want to have to spend the time to copy from one project into the other all the different styles. So you can store those styles in PostGIS, and it makes it really easy to apply those styles to future projects. It's also a really great feature when you're working in an enterprise environment and you have a lot of different users who are using the same layers, and you want them to be able to be consistent in their styling and either be creating things that look similar, maps that have similar branding, or they just need to be able to communicate with each other about certain layers. It's easier if they're looking at something that looks the same. A really good example of this is if you have a layer where you are styling your symbols based on type. So for like an oil and gas well, for example, you might have a different symbol for an oil well, a different symbol for a natural gas well. And your organization should be looking at those symbols the same, no matter what map you're looking at. You should have a standard symbol set. And if you're styling those or storing those in PostGIS, it makes it really easy for all the different users in the organization to pull those styles into their projects and make sure that they're consistent across projects. So back with the map that we've been working with, obviously just looking at it, it's pretty horrendous. QGIS essentially applies random styling to a layer when you pull it in. So one time it might apply blue to a point layer, and another time it'll apply orange. So if you just stick with whatever QGIS gives you, it's going to look pretty bad. So I've taken the time to style this map. And as you can see, I've styled the colors, the labels, made the railroads look a little bit like a railroad. And so I've taken a lot of time to do this. And if for whatever reason I needed to pull in this ghost town layer again, you'll see if I turn off my styled layer that again, QGIS has just applied a random style. And if I wanted to go ahead and get my style of choice onto that layer, I could come in here, I could go to styles, I could say copy and come back up to my other layer, styles, paste. And now my new layer does indeed have the styling I'd like. Of course, that could take a lot of time, especially if I had a lot of layers I was trying to style. So instead, that's where storing styles in PostGIS is really handy. The one other thing I'm going to show you about the styling I did on this layer has to do with forms. So if you remember back in our other map here, if I was looking at the attribute form for the ghost town layer, it's essentially just auto-generated by QGIS. So the titles are not what I'd like. There aren't really any constraints on what the user can put into the text boxes here. So in my styled map, I've done a little bit of work, nothing too intense, but I've essentially added a couple tabs. So location information over here, as well as a separate box area for the post office information. I made sure that the titles made a little bit more sense. And then if I come in here and click edit and reopen this, you can see that in the location information tab, I've actually created a drop-down. So now the user can only select from this drop-down list of townships. So this is a very basic form. There's a lot of more powerful things that you can do with this, but if you think about it, the more constraints that you can put on this form, like drop-downs, for instance, the cleaner your data is going to be in PostGIS. And so that's one of the great things about working with QGIS is that in really styling your forms in a way that's user-friendly and also lets the user know, date format, or you can only put an integer in here, or a drop-down, that's really going to make your data in PostGIS that much better. The one thing I will note is that for drop-downs and lookups, you can actually drive those off of PostGIS tables. I don't have enough time in this presentation to go through that, but that's a really powerful tool. And you can also essentially auto-populate some of these attributes based on spatial information. So instead of having the user select the township from a dropdown, that could be auto-populated in PostGIS based on where the ghost town is located. I'm not going to get into that in this presentation, but that's just something for you to check out on your own. So you can see that we have our form and our styling, and we want our ghost town layer to always look like that when we bring it into our map. And so we want to store that as a default style in PostGIS. So we can go into the properties dialog. And essentially we're in the symbology tab, and we come down to style and save as default. And so the QGIS wants to know, should we save it to the data source database, which is our PostGIS database, or our local database? We'll want to save it to PostGIS. If we chose local database, that style would only be available to myself in this QGIS, whereas I want the style to be available to anybody using the PostGIS database. So if I have other coworkers using it with me. So that's pretty much it. You click OK, and then a table is created in your public schema in PostGIS called layer styles. And so now when I pull the ghost town layer in, there's my new layer, and it's styled exactly how I want it, instead of having that random styling assigned to it like QGIS was doing. So that is styling default styles, or storing default styles in PostGIS. You can also just store a style. It doesn't have to be a default style. So for example, if I like this historic point style, it's a little diamond there. My computer's slowing down a little bit. So you can see my style there's a little kind of grayish brownish diamond. You can come down and go to style, and instead of selecting save as default, I would go ahead and say save style. And here I would want to make sure to select Postgres, and my style name, I'm just going to say gray diamond. And I could select use as default style for this layer, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say OK. So this time around, if I were to pull in another copy of this layer, QGIS is smart enough to say, hey, this is that same layer that you had before, and so I'm going to apply that new styling. But if I pull in, remove that layer, if I pull in a second version of Ghost Town, and I go to Properties, here we go, and I come down to Style, and I can say Load Style, and I want to load it from Postgres. Now there are my styles that I have related to this layer, the ghost town layer, which is the default, and then I have other styles. So I can go ahead and select the gray diamond. I can decide which of these categories I want to apply. So if I want to keep my form as is, I could just say, hey, don't apply the form, but do apply the other symbology. And I'm going to go ahead and load style and click apply. And that has changed it to that gray diamond. And now when I click on a ghost town, I'm still getting the form I had before because I said, hey, don't apply the random auto-generated form that was associated with that diamond style. And again, that same style, or that style is also stored in this layer styles table in PostGIS. So all of the styles, both default and not default, are stored there. So you can see how this is a really great tool to be able to just pull in layers, and they'll automatically be styled based on their default, or if there is a style that you like and you would use it for a number of different layers, you can just store it as a normal style and be able to apply it however as you see fit. And again, very easy to share with other people using the database. So just like we can store styles in PostGIS, we can also save entire QGIS projects in PostGIS. And this makes it really easy to work collaboratively on maps together with coworkers, either either just sharing a map with a coworker that has only view-only permissions in the database, but they can at least see it and explore the data, or actually, being able to open up a project that somebody else has worked on and then being able to edit it myself. So being able to store and access QGIS projects from PostGIS is another great feature. All right, so we're back in our ghost town map, and I want to be able to save this in the database. So it's pretty straightforward. You go to Project, Save to, Postgres, and you want to make sure that you have the correct database and then the schema. And I'm going to call this Ghost Town Map. So click OK. And if I refresh in my browser, you'll see a couple things here. So one, a QGIS underscore projects table was added, and that's where all of the projects will be saved. But also a quick link was added here. So if I go ahead and open up a new QGIS project, I'm still connected to my PostGIS database, and I pull the Ghost Town Map project onto the canvas. There we go, and the whole thing has been loaded. I can go through, I can make edits. I could decide, hey, I actually want to change my historic point. I don't know why my dialogues are taking so long to pop up here. Wanted to change this color to something a bit brighter, like a green. So I can go ahead and change that. Save it. And when I save the project, it's going to save it right back into the database. So if I were to open up yet again a new QGIS project and I drag the ghost town map onto the canvas, it will have that new green color for the historic points. So you can see that there. So that's pretty cool. So you can save as many projects as you want to the PostGIS database. You can also remove them. So to do that, you would go to Project, Save to, Postgres, and you would make sure you have it all selected here. You can go down to Manage Projects, and then you can remove the project. And it's just going to ask you to confirm. Okay. And when we refresh, we see that that project has actually been removed. We should be able to see, if we open up the attribute table here, you can see that there's nothing in that QGIS underscore projects table anymore. So we're getting close to the end of my time here, and of course I wasn't able to mention or go over everything that I would like, but there were a few things that I wanted to mention before closing. Today I mostly talked about vector data, but of course you can store raster data in PostGIS, so that's something that you might be interested in exploring further. You can also do offline editing with PostGIS. So essentially, if you're in an enterprise environment, you have your PostGIS database on your office network, you need to leave and go into the field for whatever reason, collect data out there. You can set PostGIS into an offline mode in QGIS that will download a geo package onto your laptop. You can go out into the field, collect data in the field in QGIS. It'll save it to that geo package, and when you come back into the office, you can sync that back up into your PostGIS database and make it available to your team. So those are just a couple of the things I wanted to mention. Of course, there's so much more out there, but I think we've done a pretty good job of covering the basics today. I've given you a good overview of how QGIS and PostGIS really complement each other, both in an enterprise environment with multiple users, but also for individuals working on their own projects. I did want to share a link with you. I've essentially written up what we went over today and in written format, and also included a number of resources throughout and some more information on some of the things I wasn't able to go through today. It also includes information on the installation process for QGIS, Postgres, and PostGIS, and how to create your own spatial database through pgadmin. So I'm happy to take some questions, but feel free to reach out to me. Here's my contact information. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.